Aaron was a quiet boy who lived on the edge of a small village. He did not spend much time with other children, not because he disliked them, but because he felt a deep connection to the forest behind his home. Every morning before sunrise, when most people were still asleep, Aaron walked into the woods with soft steps. The trees were tall and old, and the air smelled fresh. He loved that smell more than anything. Aaron did not know when his love for the forest began. His father used to take him for long walks among the trees when he was very young. His father would say that the forest was a place where a person could learn more than any book. Aaron listened carefully. He learned how the wind changed before rain. He learned how the sound of the leaves changed when an animal walked nearby. He learned how to follow the small signs of nature. With time, the forest felt like a friend. One day, early in the winter season, Aaron heard the village elders talking outside the shop near the main road. They spoke with worry in their voices. They said the winter would be stronger than any winter they had seen before. Some elders had lived for 70 or 80 years, and even they looked afraid. They spoke of dangerous storms, freezing nights, and long weeks of cold. Some families were already preparing to leave the village for a safer place. Aaron listened quietly. The words stayed in his mind. The idea of a winter so cold that even the strongest homes might not stand made him think. While others feared the coming season, Aaron felt something else. He felt a calling from the forest. It was not a voice, but a strong feeling deep in his heart. It was as if the forest wanted to teach him something new. The next morning, Aaron left his house before sunrise. He carried a small bag with simple tools. There was a rope, a wooden spoon, a knife with a short blade, a piece of cloth, and a bottle of water. He also had a small bit of dry bread in his pocket. That was all he needed. Aaron never carried heavy things. The forest provided the rest. The trees stood tall and silent as he walked deeper into the woods. The sunlight slowly touched the tops of the branches. Birds woke and sang a gentle morning song. Aaron felt a sense of peace. He kept walking until he reached a place he had never explored before. The trees here were thicker, and the ground was covered in soft leaves. A small stream flowed nearby, shining in the morning light. Aaron looked around for a long time. The air felt colder here, but the place felt safe. The land was slightly raised, which meant water from snow or rain would not reach too high. The trees formed a natural circle. The spot felt special. Aaron placed his hand on the ground and closed his eyes. He felt the earth under his palm. It was firm. It felt like a good place to build something. Aaron whispered a small greeting to the forest. This was a habit he learned from his father. His father always said that respect was important in nature. Aaron never forgot those words. He believed that if he respected the forest would guide him. The first step was choosing the main support for his shelter. Aaron looked at the tall pine trees standing close to each other. Their trunks were straight and strong. He decided to use them as the base. He found long branches that had fallen naturally. He never cut fresh ones unless it was necessary. He tied the first branch between the two pine trees. It was not perfect, but it was strong enough for a start. Aaron stepped back and looked at it. He imagined the shelter in his mind. He did not want a simple hut. He wanted something unique. Something that used the shape of nature. Something that could stand against strong winds and heavy snow. Many people would call his idea crazy if he described it. That thought made him smile. He liked doing things people did not expect. He began by shaping the ground. He dug a shallow pit, not too deep but enough to hold warmth. He placed dry leaves at the bottom. The leaves worked like natural insulation. Aaron had learned that from watching birds build nests. They used dry leaves to hold heat. If it worked for them, it could work for him too. He worked for hours. The sun moved across the sky. His hands became dirty with soil, but he did not care. He enjoyed every moment. When he became hungry, he ate a small piece of bread and drank water from the stream. The water was cold and clear. He felt refreshed. In the afternoon, Aaron started gathering more branches. He looked for thick ones that could form the shape of a dome. A dome was strong. It could handle pressure from snow and wind. Aaron tied the branches together with rope. It was not perfect at first. Some branches slipped. Some leaned to the side. But Aaron did not give up. He rebuilt and adjusted until it began to take shape. When the sun began to set, the dome frame was almost complete. It looked strange but strong. Aaron sighed with tired satisfaction. His arms were sore, but his heart felt light. He left the forest and walked back to his village. The air was getting colder each day. He knew he had to work faster. That night, Aaron lay in his bed thinking about the shelter. He imagined how he would cover the frame. He imagined a thick layer of mud mixed with dry grass. He imagined the roof becoming smooth like a small hill. He imagined sitting inside the shelter during a heavy winter night. He wondered if the shelter could keep him warm. He believed it could. The next morning, he returned to the forest with new energy. The air was sharp. Frost covered the grass near the edge of the village. Winter was coming quickly. Aaron felt the forest calling him again. He hurried forward. When he reached the shelter, the sight filled him with excitement. The frame looked strong. The early sunlight made the branches glow slightly. Aaron touched the frame with care. He whispered another greeting to the forest. Then he got to work. He mixed mud with crushed dry leaves. The leaves helped the mud hold together. He covered the branches slowly, pressing the mud into every gap. His hands were cold, but he kept working. The walls began to grow thicker. They became firm. The dome started to look like a clay hill. Aaron stepped back and smiled. It was becoming real. Birds watched him from nearby branches. A squirrel came close, curious about the moving hands and the new shape in its home. Aaron laughed softly. He liked their company. By sunset, the shelter looked more complete. It was not finished yet, but it was strong. Aaron placed pine needles inside as the first layer of the floor. He knew they would give warmth and softness. He walked home tired but proud. The shelter was growing. The forest was helping him. Winter was moving closer each day. But Aaron knew he was building something that could stand against it. This was only the beginning. Aaron woke before sunrise again. His eyes opened even before the birds began their morning calls. The air in his room felt colder than the day before. Winter was moving closer, and he knew he had no time to waste. He quickly packed the same small tools as always: rope, knife, water bottle, and a piece of bread. Before leaving, he checked the sky. It was clear, but the cold had already grown sharper. He stepped into the forest with quick steps. The deeper he went, the more peaceful he felt. The forest always greeted him with calm silence. The branches swayed slowly with the light wind. The trees stood tall like old watchers, guarding the heart of the woods. As Aaron walked, he felt a strange excitement building inside him. His shelter was growing. His idea was becoming real. When he reached the circle of tall trees where he had chosen to build, he stopped and took a long breath. The dome frame he had built the day before stood in the early light. The mud he had applied was hardening. The shape looked strange when seen from far away. It did not look like a normal hut, but that was exactly what Aaron wanted. He wanted something different, something nature would accept. Aaron placed his hand on one of the mud-covered branches. It felt firm. He pressed it gently. It did not bend. That was a good sign. He whispered a small thank you to the forest and then began planning the next steps. The shelter needed layers. The walls had to trap heat. The roof needed to let snow slide off. It could not hold heavy snow or else it would break. Aaron remembered how some hills near the village always lost snow quickly. Their round shape helped snow fall to the sides. He wanted that same idea for his roof. A curved roof would be strong. It would be safer in winter. Before doing anything else, Aaron walked around the shelter in a slow circle. He checked the ground. He checked the angle of the roof frame. He checked the space inside. The entrance needed to face away from the wind. The coldest winds came from the north, so Aaron marked a small opening on the southern side of the dome. It was small but enough for a person to crawl inside. A small entrance kept more heat inside. After his inspection, Aaron gathered more long branches. Some were already on the ground. Others he cut from fallen limbs. He avoided cutting live branches because he respected the forest. His father had taught him that too. Only take what nature already gives. Aaron carried the branches one by one and placed them beside the shelter. Then he began shaping the roof. He tied the branches tightly with rope. He wrapped them together so they supported each other. Each branch pushed against the other, creating strength. He made sure no part of the roof was flat. If it was flat, snow would stay. If it stayed, it would become heavy. He wanted snow to slide down. It took hours. The sun moved higher in the sky. The air warmed a little, but the cold still stayed in the shadows of the trees. Aaron worked without stopping. His fingers became tired, but he did not slow down. Every branch he placed made the shelter stronger. When the roof finally looked right, Aaron stepped back again. He examined every angle carefully. It felt good. It looked like a natural shape. Not a hut built by a person, but a structure that grew from the forest itself. Next, he mixed more mud with dry leaves and crushed grass. The mixture was thick and sticky. It was cold to touch, but Aaron used both hands to apply it on the roof. He pressed the mud firmly into the gaps. He covered the entire dome. He did not want even a small hole where wind could slip inside. The forest animals watched him from nearby branches. A small bird hopped closer, as if trying to understand what he was building. At midday, Aaron stopped and ate the piece of bread he had brought. He drank water from the stream nearby. The water was almost freezing, but it refreshed him. As he ate, he looked at the shelter from a distance. It looked like a small hill, a hill that had grown arms and a tiny entrance. It made him smile. After the break, Aaron returned to work with renewed energy. He added more layers of mud and leaves. He shaped the roof carefully. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound it made told him it was strong. He spread leaves across the top layer for extra insulation. Leaves trapped air, and air helped hold warmth. Inside the shelter, he placed more pine needles. He arranged them like a soft carpet. He wanted the floor to stay warm and comfortable. The pine needles also had a fresh scent. It made the inside smell like the heart of the forest. Aaron crawled inside to test the space. It felt dark at first, but the darkness felt peaceful. The air inside was already warmer than the outside. The dome shape held the heat well. Aaron sat for a few minutes, imagining how it would feel in deep winter. He imagined snow falling on the roof. He imagined wind blowing outside while he sat inside, safe and warm. The thought filled him with pride. He crawled out and checked the vent he had planned. A small hole near the top of the dome was needed for smoke. If he made a fire inside, the smoke needed a way to escape. Without a vent, the air would become dangerous. Aaron carefully shaped the vent so it allowed smoke to pass, but not too much cold wind to enter. It needed balance, and Aaron worked on it until he felt satisfied. By afternoon, the shelter looked almost complete. The walls were thick. The shape was strong. The entrance was small but safe. Aaron walked around it many times, checking for cracks or weak spots. When he found a small gap, he pressed mud into it. When he noticed a branch that felt loose, he tied it again. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could become a danger during winter. Aaron knew this. That was why he worked with such care. When the sun began to lower, the forest grew colder again. Aaron rubbed his hands together and looked at his creation with pride. It was not finished yet, but it was close. He felt the forest had guided him. Every decision he made came from things he had learned by watching nature. Before leaving, Aaron stepped inside the shelter one last time. The silence inside felt warm. It felt like the forest was protecting him. He sat for a moment, letting the calm wrap around him. Then he crawled out, gathered his tools, and began walking toward the village. The sky was turning orange. The cold wind brushed against his face. Aaron pulled his coat tighter but kept smiling. Tomorrow he would return and finish the last details. Soon winter would come. Soon he would see if his crazy shelter could stand against it. As he walked home, he felt a strong belief growing inside him. He did not know what the winter would bring, but he knew he had built something that came from his heart, his hands, and the lessons of the forest. And he was ready for whatever came next. Aaron woke up before sunrise once again. The cold in his room was stronger than the day before. When he breathed out, a faint cloud of white air floated in front of him. That was the first sign that winter had finally arrived. His mother placed warm tea on the table, but even the steam disappeared quickly in the cold room. Aaron drank the tea fast and got ready. His heart was already in the forest. He stepped outside and felt the sharp wind on his face. The sky had a pale gray color, and a thin layer of frost covered the ground. It cracked under his boots as he walked. The village was quiet. No children were outside. No elders were sitting near the shop. Everyone stayed indoors to avoid the early winter chill. Aaron hurried toward the woods. As he walked deeper into the forest, the air felt calmer. The tall trees blocked the wind, and the soft crunch of frost under his feet was the only sound. Birds were silent, possibly hiding in warm corners of nests. Even the squirrels moved slower today. When he reached the shelter, he stopped and observed it carefully. Snow from the night before covered the top. The curved roof held the weight perfectly. Nothing had bent or cracked. The dome stood strong like a small natural hill. Aaron felt a wave of pride warm his chest. Winter had arrived, and the shelter was ready. He brushed snow away from the entrance and crawled inside. The moment he entered, he felt a gentle change in temperature. The thick mud walls kept cold air out. The pine needle floor felt soft under his hands. There was no wind inside, only quiet and still air. He sat in the center and closed his eyes. The silence felt peaceful. Aaron opened his eyes again and began arranging the fire pit. He had prepared a small circle of stones inside the shelter to hold a safe fire. He placed dry wood in the center and struck two pieces of flint together. Sparks flew. After a few tries, a tiny flame appeared. Aaron cared for it until it grew into a small, steady fire. Warmth slowly spread through the dome. Smoke rose through the vent he had shaped earlier. It escaped easily. Aaron watched the fire flicker and tested the warmth by placing his hand near the wall. The thick mud did its job. Heat stayed inside. Aaron smiled. The shelter worked better than he imagined. After warming himself for a few minutes, he crawled outside and began preparing for the coming storms. He knew winter would not stay gentle. It would grow stronger. Snow would fall harder. Wind would push from every side. He needed to gather more firewood, more dry leaves, and more pine needles. He started by collecting fallen branches. Some were covered in frost, but he found many dry pieces under thick bushes or near tree roots. Those would burn well. He carried each stack to the side of the shelter and covered them with leaves so they stayed dry. He made multiple trips. His arms grew tired, but he did not stop after hours of collecting wood. He gathered large handfuls of leaves. He spread some on top of the shelter to add one more layer of insulation. He spread more inside on the floor. The thick carpet of pine needles and leaves made the shelter even warmer. When he stepped back to look again, the shelter almost looked like part of the forest. Its shape blended with the ground and trees. If a stranger walked by, they might think it was a natural mound. Aaron liked that. He believed the forest accepted his creation. By the time the sun reached the middle of the sky, the temperature dropped again. A new wave of cold rolled through the woods. Aaron felt it reach his skin even through his coat. Soon snowflakes began falling. Light at first, then heavier. The trees around him grew white. The wind pushed in long, slow breaths. Aaron decided it was time to test the shelter in real winter conditions. He crawled inside again and closed the entrance lightly with a bundle of leaves and a wooden stick. It was not a door, but it blocked most wind. Inside, he placed more wood into the fire. The warmth grew stronger. The crackling sound filled the space with comfort. Snow piled on the roof. Aaron could hear the soft thumps of falling snow pressing down. But nothing inside moved. The dome held firm. He reached up and touched the inner wall. It felt warm near the fire. Near the ground, it felt cool but not freezing. The balance was perfect. Aaron sat with his legs crossed and watched the fire. He imagined the storms the elders had spoken about. He imagined heavy winds and nights when the temperature dropped lower than anyone expected. He wondered if the shelter would survive those nights. A part of him felt nervous, but most of him felt confident. He believed in the design. He believed in the forest. After a long time sitting inside, Aaron crawled out again. The snow around the entrance had grown thicker. The forest looked whiter than before. Winter was truly here now. He gathered his tools and prepared to return to the village before the snowstorm grew stronger. As he walked back, the wind blew against him. Snowflakes stuck to his coat. His fingers felt stiff from the cold, but his mind stayed calm. He knew he had a warm place ready for the hardest nights. He knew he had built something useful. That evening, when he entered his house, his mother asked where he had gone. Aaron simply said he was checking the forest. His father looked at him with a raised eyebrow but said nothing. Aaron felt that his father understood more than he showed. The family sat near the fire in the small room. Even with the fire, the house felt cold. The walls were thin compared to the thick mud walls of the shelter. When the wind blew outside, the house creaked. Aaron listened carefully. He thought of how different the sound was inside the dome. There, the wind felt far away. Here, it felt close-dyed at dinner. The elders visited a few houses to warn people about the coming week. They said more storms were on their way. They told everyone to stay prepared. Some houses might lose heat. Some families might need help. Aaron listened silently. He wanted to tell people about his shelter. He wanted to say there was a safe place in the forest. But he stayed quiet for now. He wanted to test the shelter in one more storm before telling anyone. He wanted to be sure. That night, snowfall grew heavier. The temperature dropped sharply. Aaron lay in his bed under a thick blanket, but still felt the cold bite the air around him. He thought of the shelter standing strong in the forest. He imagined the snow piling on top of it. He imagined the wind surrounding it. And he smiled. His creation was ready. Winter had finally arrived. And soon, the real challenge would begin. The coldest days of the winter arrived without warning. The air itself felt like sharp glass, and every gust of wind carried tiny bits of frozen dust. Rian stepped outside early in the morning and saw the sky turning white. It was not snow. It was frost carried by the wind. The mountains around him looked like quiet giants waiting for something. He knew this day would be hard. He also knew the days to come would test him more than anything he had ever faced. Rian closed the main door of his shelter after checking the walls again. He touched the wooden pillars he placed weeks ago. They were firm. The ropes were strong. The dry mud between the logs had hardened like stone. He felt proud but nervous. He said to himself that his shelter was ready. He hoped he was right inside the shelter. The small fire pit was glowing softly. Rian brought more wood inside before the storm grew stronger. He kept the wood under a wooden cover he made from spare planks. He knew he could not go outside much during the coming days. The cold was already reaching a point where even a few minutes outdoors could be dangerous. By midday, the wind rose like a wild animal. The mountain shook with sound. The door of the shelter moved a little, and the roof made deep creaking noises. Rian stayed calm. He adjusted the wooden beams at the corners. He placed the heavy rocks against the door. It was not fear that pushed him to act. It was focus. He knew fear wasted energy. Focus saved lives. The temperature fell so fast that his breath turned into tiny crystals. He warmed his hands near the fire and cooked a small meal of rice and dried vegetables. While eating, he listened to the storm outside. The wind hit the shelter again and again. Snow slapped the outer logs like handfuls of sand. The noise was loud but steady. Rian repeated to himself that steady sounds were better than sudden cracks. Cracks meant breaking. Steady sounds meant the shelter was doing its work. Hours passed. The storm only grew stronger. The fire flickered sometimes but stayed alive. Rian stayed awake through the evening and checked every corner of the shelter. The roof above him moved a little with the force of the wind. He climbed the wooden steps he built and inspected the top beams. Everything was holding. Every knot and every log he placed with his own hands was still in the exact place he set them. He remembered the day he first started building the shelter. Back then he only had simple tools and a simple idea. He wanted a place that could survive the winter. People in the village had told him that the mountains were too cold this year. They said no simple shelter could survive. Rian had listened but continued to build. He believed a strong mind was just as important as strong wood. The storm lasted all night. Rian barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, a new burst of wind shook the shelter and woke him again. He sat near the fire, added small wooden sticks, and waited for the sky to turn bright again. When morning arrived, the light that entered through the tiny window was blue and soft. The storm had slowed but had not ended fully. Rian opened the door just a few inches. A huge pile of snow blocked the entrance. The cold hit his face instantly and made him step back. He took the small metal shovel and started clearing the entrance from inside. The work was slow and tiring. The cold air made his hands stiff. After half an hour, he managed to move enough snow to open the door halfway. Outside, the world looked completely different. Every tree had a thick layer of frost. The mountains were covered in white coats. Snow was knee-deep near the shelter and deeper farther out. The sky looked heavy as if more snow was waiting to fall. Rian stepped outside only long enough to gather snow for melting. He needed more water for the next day's dot back inside. He melted the snow and stored the water in small metal containers. He checked his food supply and felt thankful that he collected enough before the winter. He had dried fruits, nuts, rice, and vegetables. Not much, but enough. He promised himself to eat small portions each day so the food would last longer as the day went on. The storm returned. This time the wind sounded more powerful. It pushed the shelter sideways. Rian held the inside support beam and felt the pressure. He reminded himself to trust his work. He had prepared for this. His shelter was not weak. It was strong. Still, he did not relax. He checked each rope again. He checked each support log. He sat near the door and listened to every sound in the late afternoon. The wind hit the shelter so hard that loose snow on the roof slid off in a wave. Rian heard it and felt a moment of alarm. But then he realized this was good. Less snow on the roof meant less weight. The wind was loud, but the logs stayed in place. The roof beams did not shift. The foundation stayed tight. Night came early. The sky was dark before Rian even finished his meal. The cold inside the shelter increased. The fire gave warmth, but the air outside was too strong. Rian wrapped himself into thick blankets and sat near the fire. He held a wooden mug of warm water in his hands. The heat comforted him and gave him strength to stay awake. Hours later, the storm reached its highest point. The wind sounded like deep roaring in the mountains. Snow hit the roof like hundreds of tiny stones. The shelter moved a little but did not break. Rian breathed slowly and kept his mind steady. He thought about everything he had learned during this winter. He understood now that a strong shelter was more than just wood and mud. It was patience. It was steady work. It was careful choices and calm thinking. He stayed awake long into the night, waiting for the storm to calm. At last, near dawn, the sound outside changed. The wind softened. The air stopped shaking the shelter. The snow slowed down. Rian felt his body relax for the first time since morning. He stood up and checked the walls again. Everything had survived. He walked to the door and touched the wooden frame. He felt a quiet sense of victory. The coldest night of the winter had passed. His shelter had protected him. His work had proven strong. But Rian also knew the winter was not over. There were still many days of cold ahead. He promised himself to stay focused and prepared. He looked at the fire, then at the strong walls around him, and knew he could face whatever came next. The storm had passed, but the cold did not leave. The village was quiet in the morning, covered in deep white snow. Roofs bent slightly under the weight, and chimneys released thin streams of smoke. Rian walked carefully toward the forest. The path was deep with snow, and each step made a small hollow beneath his boots. He was nervous and excited. He wanted to see the shelter after the night of the strongest storm. When he arrived, the sight made him stop for a moment. The shelter stood firm. Its curved roof held snow perfectly, and the mud walls showed no cracks. The dome looked even stronger than before. Rian smiled. All the hard work, all the careful choices, all the days of preparation had paid off. His shelter had survived the coldest winter night on record. He brushed snow away from the entrance and crawled inside. The warmth embraced him. The fire pit from yesterday had cooled, but the air inside was still much warmer than outside. Rian added some dry wood and fed the fire. The smoke rose easily. Through the vent at the top, he felt safe, and for the first time in many days, he could relax. Rian spent a long moment sitting in the center of the shelter. He thought about his family. They had stayed safe inside the small village home, but it had been colder and harder to manage compared to this space. He thought about the villagers. who had been worried about the winter. He realized that this shelter could help them too. He decided to invite his family to see the shelter. He knew the cold would still be strong outside, but inside, they would feel warmth and safety. He returned to the village quickly, careful with each step. The snow had grown deeper, and the wind was still sharp, but Rion felt confident. He knew where he was going and that his shelter could handle the conditions. When his family arrived, their eyes widened as they saw the dome covered in white snow. It looked unusual, almost like a hill that had grown in the forest. Rion smiled and led them inside. The warmth inside was immediate. His mother touched the walls and breathed deeply. His father examined the frame carefully and nodded in approval. They had not expected such strength and comfort from what looked like a small, unusual shelter. Rion showed them the fire pit, the pine needle floor, and the small vent that let smoke escape. He explained how each part was carefully designed to hold heat and resist snow and wind. His family listened quietly, amazed by the thought and effort he had put into it. They understood now why Rion had spent so many days in the forest. Over the next few days, the storm returned several times. Each time, Rion's family joined him in the shelter. They spent hours inside, safe from the snow and wind. The shelter's walls stayed firm, and the warmth remained, even as the wind roared outside and the snow piled higher. Inside it was calm and cozy. Other villagers began noticing the shelter too. They watched from a distance, curious and amazed. Some walked closer and asked Rion if they could see it. He agreed. They entered one by one and felt the warmth immediately. Their eyes grew wide. Some had never experienced a space that stayed so warm even in the middle of a winter storm. Rion explained the design and the care he had taken in building it. He spoke about the dome shape, the thick mud walls, the vent, and the pine needle floor. Villagers listened attentively. They had not realized that a small structure made with respect for nature could be so strong and efficient. Soon, the shelter became a place of safety for many. Families who lived in older houses or huts that could not hold heat well came to spend nights inside. Rion welcomed them all. He taught them how to arrange firewood, how to cover the floor with pine needles for warmth, and how to protect the entrance from wind. Everyone felt grateful and safe. As the winter continued, the shelter became more than a place to survive. It became a gathering space. Villagers shared stories by the fire, cooked small meals together, and watched the snow fall outside. Children laughed and played on the soft pine needle floor. Adults sat quietly, appreciating the calm and safety. Rion watched it all with quiet pride. He realized something important. The shelter was not only a personal achievement, it was a gift. It showed the value of careful planning, respect for nature, and patience. It also showed that even one person, a boy in this case, could make a difference for many people. As the weeks passed, the snow slowly began to melt. The cold remained, but it was less harsh. Trees began to show small signs of life under the snow. The shelter still stood firm. Its walls were slightly darker from moisture, but nothing had weakened. It had survived storms, heavy snow, and the coldest nights of winter. The villagers thanked Rion openly. They brought small gifts of food and warm blankets. They praised his clever design. Rion felt shy but happy. He understood that the shelter was more than bricks or mud. It was care, effort, and a bond with the forest. Even after the winter ended, people continued to visit the shelter. Some wanted to learn, some wanted to experience the warmth, and some simply wanted to see the place that had protected so many lives. Rion showed them everything patiently. He hoped they would remember what he had learned, respect nature, plan carefully, and never give up. The forest remained quiet and peaceful around the shelter. Birds returned to their nests, and squirrels moved freely again. The small stream nearby flowed steadily. Rion sometimes sat outside the shelter, watching the world return to life. He felt grateful that the forest had accepted his work and allowed it to stand against the harshest winter he had ever known. His parents were proud, but they also learned from him. They realized that courage, creativity, and patience could solve problems that seemed impossible. Rion had done more than survive. He had shown the villagers the power of determination and careful planning. The shelter became a symbol in the village. It was called the boys' shelter, the forest shelter, or sometimes the crazy shelter because of its unusual shape. But everyone respected it. Everyone knew it had protected many people from a winter they would not forget. Rian continued to care for it even as spring approached. He cleaned the floor, repaired small cracks, and strengthened the roof with extra leaves. He wanted the shelter to last. He wanted it to be ready for the next winter. The shelter had proven its value, and he would make sure it remained strong. At last, the snow melted completely. The forest looked alive again. Flowers began to peek from the ground. The river flowed freely, and the wind felt warm for the first time in months. Rian walked through the forest, touching the trees and feeling the air. He had learned much during the winter. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. The shelter remained in its place, quiet and strong. Birds nested nearby. Squirrels played along the walls, and the forest seemed to protect it naturally. It was no longer just a building. It was part of the forest, and the forest had part of it. Rian looked at the shelter one last time before returning to the village. He smiled. Knowing it had survived storms, snow, and the coldest nights, it had kept him and many others safe. The forest had taught him well. His hands, his patience, and his care had created something extraordinary. And so, the boy and his shelter became a story told in the village for years. A story about courage, creativity, respect for nature, and the power of one person's effort. People remember how the coldest winter could not defeat the dome of mud, leaves, and pine needles. People remember how a boy's dedication could change the lives of many. Rian continued exploring the forest, learning its secrets, and building new ideas. But he always returned to the shelter. It was his first great achievement. It had proven that careful planning, patience, and respect for nature could create something that lasts, something that protects, something that inspires. And even when the forest grew quiet and the snow disappeared, the shelter remained a reminder that courage and care can build wonders, and that sometimes the simplest ideas can survive the harshest challenges.